Millionaire's son follows the family maid and discovers the unthinkable. Ethan Reynolds watched from a distance as Miss Betty quickly tucked her phone into her uniform pocket. At 16, his gut told him something was off about the woman who had cooked for his family since before he was born. For the third time that week, the maid had taken a call in secret, and when she noticed him, she nervously changed the subject. This had never happened before. Elizabeth Johnson had always been an open book, sharing stories of her childhood in rural Alabama while preparing lunch. But now she was different, withdrawn, anxious, and every Thursday she made excuses to leave early. "What are you hiding, Miss Betty?" Ethan murmured to himself, leaning against the kitchen door frame of their Beverly Hills mansion in Los Angeles. The teenager ran a hand through his blonde hair, inherited from his father, and made a decision. Next Thursday, he would uncover the secret of the Reynolds family's most loyal maid. The Reynolds mansion was like a small palace of marble and glass, the result of the construction empire Richard Reynolds, Ethan's father, had built over the last 20 years. Along with his wife Victoria, they were the picture of the perfect family in high society. A picture Ethan was starting to suspect had invisible cracks. "Heading out again, Miss Betty?" Ethan asked the following Thursday, trying to sound casual, as he watched her pack her bag. "Yes, dear, I have some personal matters to take care of. Your mother already approved," she replied without looking directly at him, unusual for someone who had always been so motherly toward him. When she walked out through the mansion gates, Ethan already had his plan in place. He grabbed his bike from the garage and followed her at a safe distance. Miss Betty took one bus, then another, finally getting off in front of a private hospital in the South Side. Ethan's heart raced. Was Miss Betty sick? Was it something serious she didn't want the family to know? He hid behind a pillar in the parking lot, watching her stride confidently into the main building, like someone who knew the way well. In the weeks that followed, Ethan continued his secret investigation. On a rainy Thursday, he saw Miss Betty entering a law office carrying a folder. The next week, she went to a bank. The mystery only deepened, along with his concern. At dinner that night, Ethan tried to probe his parents. "Don't you think Miss Betty has been acting strange lately?" he asked, pushing food around his plate. "Don't be ridiculous, Ethan," his mother Victoria replied without looking up. "Elizabeth has been with us for over 20 years. If something were wrong, she'd tell us." His father, Richard, seemed momentarily uneasy, but his face quickly returned to its usual neutral expression. "Leave the maid alone, son. She's entitled to her privacy." That reaction only fueled Ethan's curiosity. There was something in his father's tone, a subtle tension that didn't match the simplicity of the question. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. The turning point came when Ethan, searching for batteries in Miss Betty's room, small but always immaculately kept at the back of the mansion, accidentally found a golden locket hidden among clothes in a drawer. When he opened it, he nearly dropped it in shock. Inside was a faded photo, a newborn baby whose features, though indistinct, bore an unsettling resemblance to his own childhood pictures. "What are you doing in here?" Miss Betty's voice startled him. She stood in the doorway, pale as a ghost. I was looking for batteries for my remote," Ethan stammered, still holding the locket. "Miss Betty, who is this baby?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Please give that back to me and leave my room, Ethan." "But now." She had never raised her voice at him before. Confused and scared, Ethan left the room, but not before noticing something written on the back of the photo. A name. Matthew. Who was Matthew? And why did that baby look so much like him? That night, he couldn't sleep. His mind raced with theories, each one more absurd than the last. The next morning, he decided to confront Miss Betty again, but she avoided him all over the house. It wasn't until late afternoon that he found an opportunity, spotting her alone in the laundry room. "Miss Betty, we need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. Please tell me who that baby in the photo is. Why does he look so much like me?" The woman sighed deeply, as if carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her expression was a mix of fear and resignation. "Ethan, there are things you're better off not knowing. Things that could hurt a lot of people." "I'm tired of secrets. Something's wrong in this house. I can feel it. What are you hiding? What are my parents hiding?" Her silence was broken by the sound of the gates opening. Richard Reynolds had returned from his trip a day early. Miss Betty turned pale. "Go to your room, Ethan, and forget what you saw, please." But Ethan couldn't forget, especially after the scene he witnessed hours later, when he passed his father's office and heard raised voices. Through the crack in the door, he saw his father holding the locket he'd found in Miss Betty's room. "I told you to get rid of this years ago." Richard's voice was dangerously controlled, the way it always was when he was truly furious. "It's the only keepsake I have, Richard. You can't take this from me, too." Miss Betty's voice trembled. "Our agreement was clear, Elizabeth. You stay close to him, but no emotional involvement, no reminders, no past." Agreement? What agreement? Ethan couldn't hold back, pushing the door wide open. Both adults froze at the sight of him. "Ethan!" His father regained his composure first. "Go to your room. This is a private conversation." "Not until I know what this agreement is and what it has to do with that locket," Ethan insisted. Richard's eyes darkened. "You've disobeyed me for the last time. Tomorrow, you're going to a boarding school in Aspen. I've been planning this for a while. Just moved up the date." Ethan looked to Miss Betty for support, but she kept her eyes fixed on the floor, silent. This was the woman who had comforted him when he scraped his knees, who knew his favorite foods, who sang to him when he was sick. And now she seemed like a stranger. That night, Ethan couldn't believe he was being sent away from his own home. Determined to understand what was happening, he waited until everyone was asleep and went to his father's office. If there was an agreement, there had to be documents. After nearly an hour of searching through drawers and files, he found a folder marked with the date from 16 years ago, exactly his age. Inside was a confidentiality agreement between Richard Reynolds and Elizabeth Johnson, signed a week before his birth date. The contract mentioned continued services as a domestic employee and relinquishment of any rights to the minor Matthew Johnson Reynolds, hereafter referred to as Ethan Reynolds. Ethan's world collapsed. Matthew. The name on the back of the photo, it was him and Miss Betty. Miss Betty was his birth mother. The pieces began to fall into place. The mysterious Thursday outings, the visits to the hospital and the lawyer. She had been trying to reclaim her rights as his mother. Ethan spent the night wide awake, trying to process it all. The next morning, when he came down for breakfast, he found his mother, no Victoria, instructing Miss Betty about her tasks. When they saw him, both stopped talking. "Your father told me you've been snooping around," Victoria said coldly. "I've already packed your bags. The driver will take you to boarding school after breakfast." "Miss Betty is my birth mother, isn't she?" Ethan blurted out, cutting straight to the point. The silence that followed was his answer. Victoria turned pale, then flushed with anger. "That's ridiculous, Richard!" she shouted. Richard appeared in the doorway, looking older and more tired than Ethan had ever seen him. "How did you find out?" he asked, to Victoria's shock. "Richard, no!" she exclaimed. "Enough lies, Victoria," Richard replied, rubbing his face. Then, turning to Ethan, "Yes, Elizabeth is your birth mother. We had a relationship before I married Victoria. When I found out she was pregnant, I was already engaged. I offered her a deal. She could stay close to you as a maid, but never as a mother." Ethan looked at Miss Betty, who was crying silently. "Why did you agree to this?" "I was young, alone in Los Angeles. My mother had passed away, I had nowhere to go, and your father, he threatened to take you away from me completely if I refused. Said he had the money and power to make sure I never saw you again." "You got what you wanted," Victoria cut in, venom in her voice. "You stayed near him. You get a generous salary. And now you want more. You want to ruin our family." "Family?" Ethan laughed bitterly. "What family? One built on lies?" "That's enough," Richard's voice boomed. "Ethan, get your things, the driver is waiting. As for you, Elizabeth, you're fired. I want you out of this house by the end of the day." "No," Ethan shouted. "I'm not going anywhere, and I won't let you throw out my mother." The word dropped like a bomb in the room. Victoria's face twisted in rage. She stepped toward Miss Betty and, without warning, slapped her across the face. "She is not your mother. I am your mother. I raised you, educated you, gave you everything." Richard held Victoria back before she could attack again. "You're not going anywhere, Ethan. This is your home. This is your family. Elizabeth was just the person who brought you into this world, nothing more." But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. He stared at Miss Betty, touching her reddened cheek, silent tears streaming down. 20 years of service, 20 years of silence, 20 years watching her own son grow up calling another woman Mom. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. "I'll pack my things," Ethan said finally, heading upstairs. But instead of packing for boarding school, he grabbed his school backpack, stuffed it with a change of clothes, his phone, a charger, and all the money he had saved. Then he waited for the right moment and slipped out the back door without looking back. His only thought was to uncover the full truth and somehow make things right for Miss Betty, his real mother. Ethan knew he needed help. He thought of his best friend Tyler, but his family was too close to the Reynolds. His father would surely be the first place they'd look for him. Then he remembered old Walter, the family's former driver who had been fired 2 years ago, but had always been kind to him. Old Walter lived in a modest neighborhood on the east side of Los Angeles. When he opened the door and saw Ethan on the doorstep, breathless and teary-eyed, he didn't ask questions. He simply stepped aside. "Had to be today, didn't it?" The gray-haired man sighed. "Come on in, I'll make some coffee." Ethan stared at him, confused. "You knew about Miss Betty being my mother?" The old driver nodded slowly. "I worked for your father when it all happened. I saw Elizabeth arrive so young, so scared. And then I saw how your heart broke a little more each day when you had to pretend to be just a maid to your own son." Old Walter told how he had helped Miss Betty over the years, secretly taking her to the hospital when she had health problems or to the bank when she needed to send money to family in rural Alabama. This explained the mysterious outings, but not the recent visits to the lawyer. "Your father made her sign many papers when you were born," Walter explained. "She gave up all rights to you. Now that you're about to turn 17, she wanted to try to make things right." "Why now?" Ethan asked. "Because your father is planning to leave the country. He has business in Europe, and according to rumors among the staff, he intended to take you and Victoria to live there permanently. Elizabeth was afraid she'd never see you again." Ethan's head spun with so much information. This couldn't stand. A terrible injustice had been done, and he wouldn't let his birth mother suffer any longer. "I need to talk to her," he decided. Where would she be now? If she was kicked out of the mansion, she probably went to her sister's place in East Los Angeles. I have the address. Ethan wrote it down and set out the next day to find Miss Betty. Her sister's house was small but cozy on a quiet street in a working-class neighborhood. When the door opened, it wasn't Miss Betty who appeared, but an older woman who looked just like her. "Is Miss Betty here?" he asked nervously. The woman stared in surprise. "You're Ethan. My God, how you've grown." It was Miss Gladys, his birth mother's sister. She quickly pulled him inside. "Elizabeth isn't here. She's not well. She's in the hospital." Ethan's heart froze. The hospital? What happened? It was too much pressure, too much pain bottled up. When your father fired her yesterday after 20 years, it was the last straw. She had a nervous breakdown. The doctors say it was years of built-up stress. Which hospital? I need to see her. East Los Angeles Community Hospital, but be careful. Your father's already called looking for you. Ethan thanked her and rushed to the hospital. On the way, he tried to gather his thoughts. What would he say to Miss Betty when he saw her? How could he undo 20 years of injustice? At the hospital, he found her room. Standing at the door, he saw the woman who had cared for him his whole life, now hooked to monitors, looking small and fragile in the hospital bed. His chest tightened. "Mom." The word slipped out naturally. Miss Betty's eyes fluttered open. When she saw him, she tried to sit up, alarmed. "Ethan, you shouldn't be here." Your father— I know everything, he interrupted, stepping closer and taking her hand. I know you're my birth mother. I know about the agreement my father forced you to sign, and I won't let this go on. Tears rolled down Elizabeth's weary face. My son, you don't know how long I've dreamed of calling you that, but your father is a powerful, vengeful man. I don't want you hurt because of me. You suffered silently for 20 years. You cleaned the house, cooked, took care of me, all while watching another woman take the title of mother. How did you do it? For you, Ethan. All for you. I'd rather be present as a maid than absent completely. And you were such a sweet, loving boy. Even without knowing, you gave me strength every day. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, back to the story. As they spoke, they didn't. Notice the figure watching from the doorway. Victoria Reynolds, her expression unreadable. So this is where you've been hiding, she said, stepping into the room. Instinctively, Ethan moved between her and Miss Betty's bed. What do you want? He asked defensively. To his surprise, Victoria didn't seem furious, just exhausted. Your father is desperate looking for you. I thought you'd be here. Did you come to drag me back? Ethan challenged. Victoria glanced at Elizabeth in the hospital bed, then back at Ethan. Something in her expression shifted, as if a mask had fallen. No, she finally said. I came to check on Elizabeth. The answer caught Ethan off guard. Why? Yesterday you slapped her and called her worthless. Victoria walked to the window, staring outside for a moment before answering. You're not the only one who's been living a lie, Ethan. I had mine too. When I married your father, he told me about the baby he was supposed to have with Elizabeth. Said she'd agreed to hand the child over to us in exchange for money. I believed that for years. That's not true, Elizabeth exclaimed from the bed. He threatened me, said I'd never see my son again. I know, Victoria replied, surprisingly calm. I found out the truth a few years ago when I came across the original documents. I saw the abusive clauses, the veiled threats. But by then, what could I do? You were already my son, Ethan. At least that's what I thought. Ethan looked at the woman he'd always called mother, seeing her in a new light. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you help Miss Betty? Because I'm a coward, Victoria admitted, tears in her eyes. Because I was afraid of losing. You of losing my comfortable life. Your father is ruthless with anyone who crosses him. You're finding that out now. Ethan struggled to process this new revelation. Then why tell me this now? Because your father has gone too far. Last night, after you ran away, he lost control. He started making calls, threatening people, planning how to find you and silence Elizabeth for good. I saw a side of him I always suspected was there, but never witnessed directly. And I realized I can't be part of this anymore. Elizabeth looked just as shocked as Ethan. What's he planning? He's calling in favors to cancel your sister's permanent visa. She works as a caregiver for the elderly in Italy. He said he'll ruin the lives of everyone you love if you don't. Disappear from Ethan's life. He can't do that, Ethan exclaimed, outraged. He can and will unless we stop him, Victoria said, a new determination in her voice. That's why I came looking for you. We need to work together. Ethan glanced from Victoria to Elizabeth, uncertain. How do I know I can trust you? You don't, Victoria replied simply, but I brought something that might help. She opened her purse and pulled out a folder full of documents. Copies of everything. The original agreement with Elizabeth, suspicious bank transfers, your father's shady dealings, things I've collected over the years as insurance, but never had the courage to use. Elizabeth reached out with trembling hands, taking the papers. Her eyes widened as she read. This changes everything. What's in there? Ethan asked, confused. Proof that your father didn't just force me to give you up. He also stole my ideas to start his construction company, Elizabeth explained. When we met, I was an architecture intern and developed an innovative rapid build system for affordable housing. Your father took the project and sold it as his own. The Reynolds family's initial fortune came from that project, Victoria added. Richard always said it was a lucky break early in his career. A lie, it was theft. Ethan's head spun. His father wasn't just a liar, but a thief who'd stolen not only a son but Elizabeth's work and dreams. His anger grew with each new revelation. "What do we do now?" he asked. "First, we need to protect Elizabeth," said Victoria, surprising them again with her concern. "Then, we'll look for Dr. Mitchell, a lawyer who has helped others against your father in the past. With this evidence, we can at least secure a fair settlement." "I don't want money," Elizabeth said firmly. "I just want to be able to raise my son without fear." Ethan felt tears welling in his eyes. "And I want to call you Mom without having to whisper." At that moment, Ethan's phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered hesitantly. "Ethan, it's old Walter. Your father's here at my place. He's furious, tearing everything apart, looking for you. Said if I don't tell him where you are, he'll report me for an accident that happened years ago." "What accident?" Ethan asked, alarmed. "A car crash. I was driving, but your father took the blame because I'd lose my license. Now he's using it against me. Ethan, be careful." The call dropped. Ethan looked fearfully at the two women. "He's losing it," murmured Victoria. "We need to act fast." Elizabeth tried to get out of bed. "I have to leave. If Richard finds out where I am—" "No," Ethan said firmly. "You need to recover. We'll handle this." Just then, his phone rang again. It was his father. "Ethan," Richard's voice was controlled, but tense. "I know you're with that woman. This ends now. Come home and we'll forget all about it." "That woman is my mother," Ethan replied, trembling with anger. "And you lied to me my whole life." "I gave you everything you could ever want," Richard's voice rose. "A life of privilege, top-notch education, trips, gifts. What more could you want?" "The truth," Ethan answered simply. "And now that I know it, I can't go back." "You're just like her," Richard said scornfully. "Sentimental and foolish. Fine. If you want war, you'll get war. But remember, I never lose." The call ended abruptly. Ethan looked at the two women, fear evident on his young face. "He's coming after us with everything he's got." "Then we need to be ready," Victoria said firmly. "I'll call Dr. Mitchell right now." In the days that followed, an intense legal and emotional battle unfolded. Richard Reynolds used all his power and influence to pressure, threaten, and bribe. He tried freezing Victoria's bank accounts, threatened to sue Elizabeth for blackmail, and even sent security guards to intimidate Ethan at the hospital, where he continued visiting his birth mother. But Richard hadn't accounted for three things: his son's determination, his wife's newfound courage, and the resilience of the woman he'd oppressed for 20 years. With Dr. Mitchell's help, Victoria secured a restraining order against Richard. Elizabeth, now recovered, gave a detailed statement about the psychological abuse and coercion she'd endured. And Ethan, wise beyond his 16 years, began reaching out to his father's former associates who'd been wronged over the years. The pressure mounted on Richard Reynolds. The press caught wind of the scandal, the powerful businessman who'd stolen not just ideas but also a mother's right to raise her own child. Cornered, Richard finally agreed to mediation. In Dr. Mitchell's luxurious office, they faced each other. On one side, Richard and his lawyers. On the other, Ethan, Elizabeth, and Victoria. "I still can't believe you're siding with them," Richard said bitterly to Victoria. "I'm siding with the truth, finally," she replied with dignity. "Something you never valued." Dr. Mitchell laid out the terms of the proposed agreement. Richard would publicly acknowledge Elizabeth as Ethan's biological mother, pay compensation for the intellectual theft of the architectural project, and guarantee a lifetime pension as restitution for years of service and forced silence. "This is extortion," Richard exclaimed, slamming the table. "This is justice," Ethan replied firmly. "And if you don't accept, we'll take this as far as it goes. All the evidence we have will go to the police, the press, and your competitors." Richard looked at his son, a mix of anger and surprisingly a hint of reluctant pride in his eyes. "You have my determination," he said. "Too bad you're using it against me." "I'm using it for the truth," Ethan corrected. "Something you should have done from the start." After hours of tense negotiation, Richard finally conceded to the main points. He would sign the documents acknowledging Elizabeth, pay the compensation, and ensure she'd never have to work as a maid again. But there was a stalemate. Richard refused any public acknowledgement. To him, it would be unbearable humiliation. "The world doesn't need to know our personal affairs," he insisted. Ethan glanced at Elizabeth, who took his hand tenderly. "I don't need the world to know," she said softly. "I just need my son to know." That simple statement, full of maternal love, seemed to affect Richard more than all the legal threats. For the first time, he seemed to grasp the real harm he'd caused. I'm sorry, Elizabeth," he said, barely audible. "Not for the settlement or the money, but for stealing those years from you." The silence that followed was profound. No one expected an apology from Richard Reynolds. In the weeks that followed, a new reality took shape for everyone involved. Ethan split his time between the home he'd grown up in with Victoria, who decided to separate from Richard, but remained cordial with her stepson, and the new apartment Elizabeth bought with part of the settlement. Richard, faced with the consequences of his actions, began a slow and painful process of reflection. Though still proud and stubborn, he made tentative gestures of reconciliation. He officially credited Elizabeth as co-creator of the project that built his fortune, offered her a position at his company, which she politely declined, and awkwardly tried to rebuild some kind of relationship with his son. For Ethan, the transition was complicated. He now had two mothers, Elizabeth, who had carried him and loved him silently for years, and Victoria, who, despite her mistakes, had raised him, and now sought redemption. One Sunday afternoon, 3 months after the fateful discovery, Ethan stood on Elizabeth's balcony watching the sunset over Los Angeles. His birth mother joined him, bringing a tray of freshly baked cheese bread, always his favorite snack. "What's on your mind?" she asked, sitting beside him. "How life takes turns," he replied. "A few months ago, I was just the spoiled son of a wealthy businessman. Now I'm the son of a talented architect, finally getting recognition for her work." Elizabeth smiled, her eyes shining with pride. With the settlement and professional acknowledgement, she'd opened a small architecture firm specializing in affordable housing, finally fulfilling her lifelong dream. "You know what makes me happiest," she said. "Seeing how you've grown, standing up to your father, fighting for the truth. It shows the man you're becoming." "I had a good upbringing," Ethan answered, holding her hand. "Even when you were just Miss Betty, you taught me about honesty, respect, and perseverance." Ethan's phone rang. It was Victoria, asking if he'd come for dinner that evening. This was the new dynamic, a shared schedule, 2 homes, 2 mothers. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And after so many years of lies, the truth, even imperfect, was a relief. "I'll stop by for dinner," he replied. "Would you like to come with me?" he asked Elizabeth after hanging up. That was the most surprising development of the whole situation. Victoria and Elizabeth, after decades of an employer-employee relationship built on secrets and resentment, were now forming an unlikely friendship. United by their genuine concern for Ethan and their desire to mend the wounds of the past, the 2 women discovered they had more in common than they'd ever imagined. "Not today, son. I have a meeting with potential investors for the housing project in Compton, but thank Victoria for the invitation." Ethan nodded, still amazed by this new reality. His phone buzzed again. A message from his father asking if they could have lunch the next day. These interactions were still uncomfortable, weighed down by betrayal and lies, but Ethan was determined not to perpetuate the cycle of hurt. He replied yes. The Reynolds family's story didn't have a perfect fairy tale ending. It had scars, resentment still healing, and fragile relationships being rebuilt piece by piece. But it had something that was missing before: truth. That evening, before leaving for dinner with Victoria, Ethan paused at the door of Elizabeth's apartment and glanced back. His birth mother was bent over her drafting table, working on a new project, her face lit up by her rediscovered passion for architecture. Around her neck gleamed the golden locket, now holding 2 photos, the old one of baby Ethan and a new one, recent, of him smiling beside her. "See you tomorrow, Mom," he said. Elizabeth looked up. That word, Mom, still sounding like music to her ears after so many years of being Miss Betty. "See you tomorrow, my son," she replied, her heart overflowing. Ethan closed the door gently and walked downstairs, thinking how sometimes you have to follow someone else's path to find your own. It was by following the footsteps of the family's housekeeper that he had discovered not only his true mother, but also who he really was and who he wanted to become. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, continuing. 6 months later, life had settled into a new rhythm for everyone. Richard's business empire remained strong, though he himself had changed. The experience of nearly losing his son and being publicly exposed led him to a deep re-evaluation. He began therapy, something he once would have considered ridiculous, and gradually started recognizing toxic behavioral patterns passed down through generations. On a particularly meaningful afternoon, Richard invited Ethan to see a new project, a community center in Watts, one of the largest neighborhoods in Los Angeles. The building had been designed by Elizabeth as part of her growing professional partnership with Richard, a collaboration that began as amends but now genuinely valued her talent. "What do you think?" Richard asked as they walked through the nearly finished building. The design was innovative: bright, open spaces, multi-purpose, rooms, a library, and a green rooftop with a view of the city. "It's incredible," Ethan answered sincerely. "I can see her style in every detail." Richard nodded, a shadow of regret crossing his face. "She was always brilliant. I should have recognized that 20 years ago instead of, well, you know." "Why didn't you?" Ethan asked directly. These conversations were still hard but necessary. Richard fell silent for a moment. Fear, I suppose. Fear of not being the best, of needing someone, of her overshadowing my success. My father always said that successful men needed decorative wives, not competitive partners. And now? Now I know I was wrong about everything. The relationship between father and son was far from perfect, but moments like that offered small repairs to a severely damaged foundation. Meanwhile, Victoria had rediscovered her own passion. Before marrying Richard, she had dreamed of being a journalist. Now free from the social pressures of being the perfect wife to the perfect businessman, she began writing a column on women's empowerment for a major newspaper. Her first piece tackled the very social pressures that lead women to accept unacceptable situations for status and financial security, a painful but cathartic reflection on her own life. In her new home, much more modest than the mansion but cozy and authentic, Victoria began building an identity of her own, separate from the Reynolds name. For Ethan, seeing her find her voice after so many years of submissive silence was inspiring. "You seem happier," he commented during one of their regular dinners. "I am," she confirmed. "You know, for years I thought I needed all of that. The mansion, the jewels, the status. But they were golden chains, Ethan. Here in this simple apartment with work that truly matters, I'm finally free." "And how is it sharing motherhood?" he asked hesitantly. "It was always a delicate subject." Victoria smiled. "Surprisingly liberating. Every mother should have a partner like Elizabeth. She takes care of you when I'm busy, gives advice that complements mine, and is there for the moments when I've stumbled as a mother." "You make a good team," Ethan agreed, still amazed at how two women with so many reasons to hate each other had found genuine friendship. "And you? How are you handling all of this? 2 homes, 2 mothers, a father in the process of redemption. It's not exactly a typical adolescence." Ethan thought for a moment. "I think I've learned more about life in these past few months than in the previous 16 years. About truth, forgiveness, new beginnings, and how people can change when we give them a second chance." Ethan's experiences had transformed him. At school, he became more empathetic and observant, often standing up for marginalized classmates. His privilege, which he once took for granted, now felt like a responsibility. He began regularly visiting the community center designed by Elizabeth, first out of curiosity, then as a volunteer. It was during one of these volunteer shifts that Ethan met Hannah, a young art teacher who worked with children from the community. Smart, socially committed, and with a smile that lit up any room, she quickly captured the teenager's heart. "So you're the famous Ethan Reynolds?" she asked during their first meeting as he helped organize materials for a painting class. "Famous?" he replied, confused. "Yeah, the millionaire's son who found out the housekeeper was his birth mother and turned everyone's lives upside down, she said with a playful smile. The older kids talk about it. It's practically an urban legend around here. Ethan blushed, uncomfortable. It wasn't exactly like that. Relax, she laughed. I think it was brave. Not everyone would have the courage to face a lifetime of lies, especially someone with so much to lose. That remark caught him off guard. In his original social circle, wealthy, privileged friends, many had distanced themselves when the scandal broke. They treated him with suspicion, as if the revelation about his origins made him less deserving of his status. Hannah, however, saw his actions as admirable. In the following weeks, Ethan spent more and more time at the community center, helping with Hannah's classes and learning about a social reality he had only glimpsed before through the tinted windows of his father's imported car. "Why do you care so much?" Hannah asked one afternoon as they watched the children playing in the center's newly opened courtyard. "Because I think I finally understand my mother's original vision," Ethan replied. "It wasn't just about buildings, it was about building communities, giving people dignity through spaces that respect them." "Your birth mother sounds amazing." "So they both are," Ethan answered with a smile. "In different ways, but equally important." That evening, when he arrived at Elizabeth's apartment, he found her chatting animatedly with Victoria in the living room. The two were surrounded by plants and fabric samples. "What's going on here?" he asked, surprised by the domestic scene. "We're planning the remodel for Victoria's apartment," Elizabeth explained excitedly. She finally decided to ditch that magazine mansion style and create a space that really reflects who she is. "And your mom has an incredible talent for it," Victoria added. "Not just for big projects, but for turning houses into homes." Ethan watched the two women working together and felt a wave of gratitude. So much could have gone wrong. Permanent hatred, endless legal battles, a family shattered beyond repair. Instead, through hard work, painful honesty, and a willingness to rebuild, something new and genuine was rising from the ashes of the old lie. That night, lying in bed at Elizabeth's apartment, he alternated weeks between the two homes. Ethan reflected on how one impulsive decision, secretly following the family's housekeeper, had triggered a complete transformation in so many lives. His thoughts were interrupted by his phone buzzing. It was a message from Hannah. "The kids loved your idea for the traveling art exhibit. You're so much more than just the millionaire's son, you know? Good night." Ethan smiled. In his old life, his worth had been tied directly to the Reynolds name and the fortune that came with it. Now he was building his own identity, based on his choices and values. The next morning at breakfast, Elizabeth noticed her son's distracted smile. "Who's the girl?" she asked bluntly, with the intimate knowledge only a mother possesses. Ethan choked on his coffee. "How did you—" "I have eyes, son, and I know that look." "So who is she?" "Hannah. She's the art teacher at the community center, but we're just friends." Elizabeth smiled but didn't press further. Instead, she asked about his plans for the future. "I've been thinking about architecture," Ethan said, "or maybe social engineering, something that combines construction with community purpose, like the original project your father that we developed together years ago. Yes, but expanded. Not just affordable housing, but spaces that truly transform communities." Elizabeth felt her eyes well up. For years, working as a housekeeper, she had stifled all her dreams and professional ambitions. Now, seeing her son consider following a path inspired by her original vision was a redemption she had never imagined possible. "It would be an honor to work alongside you one day," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Ethan took his mother's hand. "The honor would be mine." Weeks turned into months, and each person in that complex family web continued their journey of personal transformation. Richard, though still struggling with years of toxic conditioning, made genuine progress in therapy and began developing a healthier relationship with Ethan, and surprisingly, a respectful cordiality with Elizabeth. "Your father apologized to me today," Elizabeth said to Ethan one evening. "Again?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, but this time was different. It wasn't just about the forced agreement or the stolen project. It was about the little, daily humiliations. The times he made me clean the same spot 2-3 times because it wasn't perfect. the times he hosted dinners for important people and introduced me as just the maid. And how did that make you feel? Like a very old wound could finally begin to heal. Victoria also flourished in her new life. Her column became popular, and she was invited to speak at universities about abusive relationships and financial dependence as a form of control. At one of these talks, she reconnected with an old college classmate who had always had a crush on her, a literature professor with kind eyes and no interest in business empires. One Sunday afternoon, the three parts of this unconventional family gathered for lunch at Elizabeth's apartment. Richard came with his therapist, whom he had started seeing not just professionally. Victoria brought the literature professor, with whom she was cautiously dating. Ethan invited Hannah, much to the delight of both mothers who had already suspected the budding romance. And Elizabeth surprised everyone by announcing she had been invited to teach sustainable architecture at the university. The lunch was awkward at first, with hesitant conversations and occasional silences. But gradually, between nervous laughter and shared stories, a strange harmony began to form. It wasn't the perfect family, far from it, but it was real, built on painful truths, hard-won forgiveness, and the determination to create something better. As the evening wound down and everyone said their goodbyes, Richard pulled Ethan aside. "I was wrong, son," he said quietly. "When you chose to follow Elizabeth that day, I thought I was losing everything. But in truth, you freed us all from a prison I had built myself." Ethan hugged his father, a gesture still rare between them, and for the first time, he felt Richard was truly present, no longer hiding behind a wall of pride and power. Later, alone on Elizabeth's balcony, watching the lights of Los Angeles flicker on one by one, Ethan thought about how one simple teenage decision had sparked such a profound transformation. Choosing to follow the family maid had been the first truly independent act of his life, the moment he stopped being just the passive heir to a fortune and a name and became the author of his own story. Hannah joined him, bringing 2 cups of tea. "What are you thinking about so deeply?" she asked. "About how complicated families are, and how the truth, even when it hurts, even when it shatters everything, is still better than the prettiest lie." Hannah nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "You know what I admire most about you. It's not the last name or what it stands for. It's that when faced with a hard truth, you chose the toughest path, but the fairest one." Ethan looked back inside the apartment, where Elizabeth was chatting animatedly with Victoria about the renovation they were planning together. His birth mother, who had spent 2 decades as a silent maid, now glowed with a confidence and joy he had never seen before. And Victoria, freed from the gilded cage she had mistaken for happiness, looked 10 years younger, her eyes bright with renewed purpose. "It was worth every hard moment," Ethan said, feeling at peace for the first time in many months. That night, after everyone had left, Ethan wrote in his journal, a habit Hannah had encouraged him to start. His final words perfectly summed up the journey that had only just begun. "I followed the family maid and found my mother. In the process, I found myself. I don't know what the future holds for this strange family we're rebuilding, but I know it will be based on truth. And truth, however imperfect, is the only foundation on which something genuine can grow." End of story. And you? What would you do in Ethan's place? Would you have the courage to confront a lifetime of lies for the sake of truth? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to leave your like. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.